Hello everyone, welcome to the Cinema Analysis channel. I am Juzo. This channel will explore the hidden truth of films that are not usually revealed. Today I'd like to talk about Heaven's Gate. I don't necessarily think this film is bad. It's a big budget movie worth seeing. However, it became a disaster at the box office. Why? I'd like to talk about that. If you haven't seen the film, I suggest watching it first. So let's get started. So did you see the film? How many people watched it without taking an intermission? One major reason this film didn't succeed was its length. 290 minutes. Although it's incredibly long, it's not the longest film in history. The longest is Red Sam, which runs for 14 hours and 33 minutes. There are more than 10 films that exceed 8 hours, though they are largely unknown to the public. Even though many films longer than 3 hours have succeeded at the box office, such as Titanic and The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King, they are still shorter than Heaven's Gate. For example, Gone with the Wind, which is 221 minutes long, was a massive hit. The longer a film is, the harder it is to attract an audience. Shorter films generally perform better at the box office because they allow for more screenings per day. Yet, long films continue to be made because filmmakers want to express their vision in an extended format. However, only very patient people can sit in a theater for nearly 4 hours. It is said that the human attention span for sitting still maxes out at around 4 hours, and boredom or fatigue sets in much sooner. Michael Cimino, the director of Heaven's Gate, was involved in the screenplays for Silent Running and Magnum Force. Later, he wrote Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, starring Clint Eastwood, and made his directorial debut with the film. It was both critically praised and commercially successful. His next film, The Deer Hunter, won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. Unfortunately, that turned out to be the peak of Cimino's career. Following the success of The Deer Hunter, expectations for Cimino were inevitably raised. By then, he had become a celebrated filmmaker, and those around him had to follow his lead. The budget for Heaven's Gate ballooned to $44 million, but it only made $3.5 million at the box office. United Artists, the studio behind the film, went bankrupt and was later acquired by MGM. After this failure, Cimino lost creative freedom. Although he directed Year of the Dragon 5 years later, it was neither a commercial success nor critically well received. Additionally, it was criticized for reinforcing negative stereotypes about Asian people. Never again able to create a box office hit, Cimino passed away in 2016. The running time of Heaven's Gate was seen as a problem, but its content was also criticized at the time. However, in recent years, its evaluation has begun to change. One reason for this shift is that the film can now be watched at home through formats like DVD. When you can take breaks whenever you like, the film doesn't seem as difficult to sit through. Heaven's Gate is often classified as a Western, but in many ways it is an outlier within the genre. First, what exactly defines a Western film? Westerns typically depict the American frontier, also known as the Old West. While interpretations vary, the American frontier is generally considered to have begun in 1865 after the Civil War and ended in 1890. That year, the U.S. Census Bureau stopped recording frontier expansion, marking the point when no new lands remained for settlement. Films like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Wild Bunch, which depict events after the end of the frontier, are not usually considered typical westerns. The events of Heaven's Gate take place around 1890, at the very end of the Western frontier era. Traditional westerns often portray Native Americans as villains or obstacles to be conquered, while depicting white settlers expanding their territory as a positive development. Additionally, white outlaws who steal land or wealth from other white settlers are commonly depicted as villains. In this sense, classic westerns typically focus on heroes who defeat such antagonists. Heroes must be strong. There is a well-known story about director Howard Hawks, who was angered by the film High Noon, in which the sheriff asks civilians for help. In response, he made Rio Bravo. The Puritans, who mainly came from Britain, began conquering the American continent from east to west. At first, the land must have seemed infinite. The more they expanded, the richer their future must have seemed, or so they imagined. But of course, the American continent has a western edge, which they finally reached around 1890. The event depicted in Heaven's Gate is known as the Johnson County War. In short, this conflict arose from tensions between large and small livestock ranchers, which eventually escalated into violence. In modern terms, it might be comparable to large retailers and small stores engaging in deadly competition. Conflicts of this nature, where the powerful clash with the weaker, can be found in every era and nation, which is why this story remains compelling. The film portrays a conflict over cattle at the end of the American frontier era. Interestingly, neither cows nor horses originally existed on the American continent. White settlers brought them from Europe. Many people have seen Western films in which Native Americans on horseback chase stagecoaches and fire arrows at settlers. But when Europeans first arrived in America, there were no horses. It is said that at first, Native Americans saw horses as giant dogs. There is also a theory that some indigenous people feared a rider on horseback, seeing them as a two-headed monster. Additionally, there were no cars on the continent, only buffalo. Cattle were primarily introduced to the Americas by the Spanish. Texas, originally part of Mexico, became a battleground when it declared independence. During this upheaval, many Mexican ranchers fled south, leaving behind their cattle. After Texas became part of the United States, these cattle spread throughout the country, leading the rise of cowboys, men who raised and herded livestock. Because Texas was a southern state, enslaved black people were also involved in cattle management. In fact, some theories suggest that about a quarter of all cowboys were black. There are many Western films featuring black characters, but few, if any, depict black cowboys. While black soldiers, gunmen, and outlaws appear in westerns, they are rarely portrayed as cowboys. As settlers moved west, so did cattle. During the Civil War, the northern states refused to buy cattle from the south. As a result, the cattle population in the south grew and the prices plummeted. After the war, northern states resumed purchasing southern cattle, and cattle ranching expanded into the north as well. Eastern settlers headed west in search of land for ranching, Wyoming, with its vast grasslands, became a prime location for cattle ranching, attracting many settlers. This is the setting of Heaven's Gate. Although there are various theories about the causes of the Civil War, it was not solely about the abolition of slavery. If the southern states had continued buying industrial goods from Europe, they wouldn't have needed to purchase them from the north. This would have hurt the northern economy by reducing its market for manufactured goods. Some argue that this economic tension was one of the underlying causes of the war. It was a kind of economic protectionism, a strategy to shield American industries from European competition. At the same time, however, America prided itself on being a land of opportunity, welcoming immigrants. Although the government sought to limit European imports and foreign political influence, following the principles of the Monroe Doctrine, it could not turn away European immigrants. Heaven's Gate portrays the struggle between earlier white settlers and the Eastern European immigrants who arrived after them. Another major reason for the failure of Heaven's Gate seems to be its distortion of historical facts, which distanced the story from the true essence of the incident. The Johnson County War depicted in Heaven's Gate was a conflict between large livestock ranchers who had been established since the early days and the newly arrived smaller ranchers. This tension eventually escalated into violence. Immigrants who had settled and succeeded early on had gained vested interests as owners of large ranches. Later, the Homestead Act, which granted land to new immigrants, had to conflict between these established ranchers and the smaller newcomers. The issue arose because those with vested interests in the livestock industry refused to allow new competition. But the film portrays as if the Western European whites that had occupied the land since the early days tried to terminate the Eastern European whites. Those who confronted Wyoming Stock Growers Association, the group of the large livestock raisers, are the cowboys who came up with their way to the smaller livestock raisers. To compete with the WSGA, they formed the Northern Wyoming Farmers and Stock Growers Association, NWFSGA. In reality, cattle theft, depicted in the film, was a significant issue. The large ranchers believed that newcomers were responsible for the theft. However, it was not always clear whether those accused and killed as cattle thieves were actually guilty. Eastern European immigrants were reportedly a minority among the new settlers. At the beginning of the film, there is a particularly striking scene. A man shoots and kills an Eastern European immigrant who was hiding and butchering a stolen cow. The shooter is Nathan D. Champion, one of the film's main characters, played by Christopher Walken. He turns to the line of immigrants and says, "Go back to where you came from." This is an ironic statement, as he himself is also an immigrant. It is a thought-provoking moment. Michael Cimino seems to have been drawn to themes of ethnicity. However, by framing the conflict primarily as a racial confrontation, he failed to capture the true essence of this historical event. Perhaps he wanted to present a fresh take, avoiding the familiar narrative of a struggle between immigrant farmers and cowboys. However, the historical facts alone were compelling enough to create an engaging story. The idea that hard work in developing the land would lead to wealth and a bright future is central to the frontier spirit. Yet, the American continent, once thought to be limitless, reached its western edge. By 1890, when the Johnson County War occurred, this reality had become clear. If land and resources were infinite, competition for them would not be necessary. But as the frontier closed, the conflicts arose over limited resources. The old premise of endless expansion was overturned, and a new way of thinking was needed. This shift created dramatic tension, which is why the Johnson County War is considered a symbolic event in Western frontier history. Such historical material has the potential to make for a truly compelling film. However, it is also a sensitive topic, as it highlights contradictions and conflicts within American society. It requires careful handling. Without it, the film risks provoking resentment. Heaven's Gate uses the name of real historical figures, but their roles are altered from reality. This is one reason why the film has been criticized. For example, Nathan Champion, as previously mentioned, is depicted as an assassin hired by the WSGA. In reality, he was the leader of the NWFSGA, which opposed WSGA. It is unclear why Cimino chose to use the name of a real person while completely changing his role in the story. Stephen Beck, a former senior vice president at United Artists when Heaven's Gate was produced, wrote about this issue in his book Final Cut. He noted that while the script was not historically accurate, that alone was not a reason to dismiss the film's dramatic potential. Altering historical facts in films is not inherently problematic. In many cases, such changes enhance a story's appeal. For example, in My Darling Clementine, directed by John Ford, Doc Holliday dies in a shootout, a deviation from historical fact that is generally accepted because it serves the film's dramatic impact. However, historical inaccuracies become an issue when they fail to satisfy the audience. The protagonist of Heaven's Gate is James Averill, played by Chris Christopherson. In the film, he is depicted as a chef, whereas in reality he was a local postmaster and shop owner. The book Final Cut notes that one source claims Averill attended Cornell University, but there is no definite proof of this. Ella Watson, the woman with whom Averill falls in love, is portrayed as a prostitute. However, historical evidence does not support this characterization. The claim that she was a prostitute originated from Albert John Boswell, one of the most influential cattle barons, who also accused her of cattle theft. This suggests that the allegation was likely a fabrication. Ella Watson is believed to have worked as a seamstress and cook. One theory suggests that because many cowboys visited her home to have their clothes tailored, rumors spread that she was a prostitute. She later met Averill, and together they began raising livestock. The WSGA accused them of stealing cattle and had them both lynched. It was extremely rare in American history for a woman to be lynched, making this a particularly shocking event. Today, their execution is widely believed to have been a warning to other settlers, signaling that resistance to the large livestock ranches would not be tolerated. This event was a key precursor to the Johnson County War. It is puzzling that Cimino chose not to highlight this significant moment in history. At the time, land and livestock ownership were often unclear. As fences and barbed wire were not widely used, cattle were commonly raised on public land, leading to disputes over ownership. Meanwhile, some individuals, like Albert John Boswell, legally fenced off public land and claimed it as their personal property. In 1884, the WSGA passed the Maverick Law, which effectively transferred ownership of unbranded cattle to the WSGA. Under this law, any cattle not bearing the WSGA brand were considered stolen. Even if new settlers captured wild cattle and branded them, their claims were not regularized. Originally, cattle were introduced to the Americas by the Spanish. It is questionable that the WSGA could claim ownership over all cattle, including those that had gone wild. Many settlers who legally purchased cattle were falsely accused of theft and subsequently murdered. In Heaven's Gate, all new settlers are depicted as thieves. Oversimplification that risks reinforcing prejudice. The climax of The Deer Hunter famously features a game of Russian roulette between Robert De Niro and Christopher Walken. This scene is widely believed to be a fictional invention by Cimino, as there is no evidence that Russian roulette was ever forced upon prisoners of war in Vietnam. Similarly, Year of the Dragon was criticized for its portrayal of Asian and Chinese people. While Cimino is known for incorporating ethnic themes in his films, his portrayals often rely on stereotypes and display a degree of bias.